your race, your gender, and your class. Whatever your combination of these three things, that would affect what you could do on a daily basis and in your life. Let's look at race. In the Victorian era, people were seeking order. Many believed that everything on earth had its own place and that some things were more valuable than others. Many people believed that something called the Great Chain of Being explained which things on earth were more important and which things were less important. Here is a version of the Great Chain of Being. As you can see on the chain, God is at the top, and humans are more important than animals, but less important than angels. Some people living in the Victorian era were so obsessed with organizing things that they created something like a chain of being for humans. This chain organized all the known races of the world into those more or less important. Sometimes the races included different nationalities. You would have things like British as a race, Italian as a race, Russian as a race, and Asian as a race. It should not surprise you to hear that when English people drew the chain, they put British people at the top. At the bottom of this human chain of being were those humans that looked most different from the British, so Africans, Asians, and First Nations people. In the middle of the chain would be those people who looked like British people but were not British. This human chain of being was a very racist idea, but at the time it was very popular and people believed that it was accurate. And please remember, at this time, if your people, and I mean the British, are conquering country after country all over the world, it might make sense to you that your race is better than all of the others. I'm not saying it's right, I'm just describing the way it was. So if your race was quote-unquote British, then you could do and achieve more in the British Empire than if you were African or Asian or another race that was not British. That included jobs, owning property, and voting. Gender was similar. In keeping with the idea that everything had its place, people living in the Victorian era believed that men and women had their own places. For a variety of reasons, the woman's place was in the home. Because she was so much more nurturing and kinder and sweeter than men, so the theory went, the best place for a woman was to stay in the home, keep it clean, and raise children. Men, on the other hand, were meaner and tougher, so their place was the outside world, facing the harsh realities of the difficult worlds of business and politics. Those areas, according to these ideas, were no place for a woman. Please pause the video and take a moment to analyze this image. What indications can you see that the author believes this family benefits from having the woman stay home? Welcome back. So your gender also affected what you could do or not do on a daily basis and in your life. For example, in the Victorian era, it was thought to be inappropriate for a woman to go out in public by herself. If she had to go out, she should be accompanied by a man, preferably her husband, her father, or her brother. The idea was that because the outside world was so harsh, the woman should be protected. One's gender affected their role in Victorian society and the actual physical spaces they could occupy. The last one is class. Communities, upper-class ones especially, communities in the Victorian era worked hard to establish clear divisions between people of different socioeconomic classes. The upper class were the wealthiest citizens, often those who were born into positions of privilege. The middle class was professional men like lawyers, doctors, business owners, and their families. They were financially secure, but perhaps not as well off as the upper class, or not a descendant of an aristocratic family. The working class was made up of people who were trying to get by on a daily basis. They were men, women, and children who worked at low-paying jobs and who struggled to afford the clothes on their back, a roof over their head, and enough to eat. In Victorian society, efforts were made to establish clear divisions between these classes. People of different classes would live in different neighborhoods. Other ways to distinguish yourself from members of another class were the people you socialized with and the clothes that you wore. So in conclusion, in the Victorian era, there were strict social norms that dictated, based on your race, gender, and class, what place you had in society and what you could and could not do. Another characteristic of Victorian England that is important to understand is that there were strict cultural rules about morality, about what was and what was not appropriate behavior. This included speech, manners, and clothing. For some people in the middle class, they desired to be accepted by members of the upper class. Some people in the working class desired to be accepted by members of the middle class. To increase their chances, or so they thought, the people in the lower classes tried to speak and act like those in the upper class. Hundreds of books were printed about how to behave so that people could practice and act the right way when out in public. Another way that Victorians demonstrated their high morals was in the clothing that